Hi everybody and welcome to the Autumn Wreath Kit tutorial for 2023, and I'm very excited to make this with you today. It's actually a gorgeous crisp autumnal morning here, even though it's the very last day of August, but it's really nice to kind of start the season with a gorgeous wreath. It's one of my favourite ways to transition into autumn. So I've got my kit, everything that you guys will have had delivered in front of me. So we've got a nice big bunch of the beautiful autumn beech. We've got some pampas grass. We've got some lovely mixed foliage. We've got some grasses, more pistache, and then these amazing banksia, which dry out so beautifully. They're so textured. I just couldn't resist adding them in with their colour, and I love the leaves, like the spikiness. So yeah, hopefully this is just going to be really nice, kind of relaxing tutorial. Probably take about 40-45 minutes. I always like to work where I've got somewhere quite high at the kitchen island, just so it's not back-breaking after a while. And yeah, just make sure you've got a nice clear workspace so that you can kind of make a bit of a mess, and a beautiful mess, of course. But yeah, otherwise I hope you thoroughly enjoy creating your wreath with me, and let's get started. So you've got a straw wreath base. So this is a 12-inch straw wreath base. I always like to use this size, just makes a nice full-sized wreath. We don't need a moss base on this one. None of the flowers and foliage that we're using, they're all very hardy, so they're going to withstand temperatures outside at this time of year. So, and then, like I said, everything's going to dry really beautifully as well. And then you've got your wire reel. And all we're going to do is attach the wire reel to the straw wreath kit first of all. I'm just going to take it, unwrap the wire a little bit, and I'm just going to very simply twist those two around each other, and probably just go round another time, about that. And if you've never made a wreath with me before, we're going to be making kind of small bundles that get placed onto the wreath and attached, and you want to work in the same direction the whole way around your wreath. So if you start on this side, you stay on this side, or I'm right-handed, so I feel very comfortable on that side, but if you're left-handed, you might find it much more comfortable on the left-hand side of your wreath. Just like I said, there's no right or wrong to it, as long as all of your bundles go in the same direction, which will make a lot more sense as we get started. So I like to lay everything out in front of me, just so that I can very easily kind of pick from everything. And for the bundles, initially I'm just going to be using 3 ingredients. I'm going to be using the pistache, the grevillea, and the autumn beech. So I'm just going to move those out of my way for now. And that's going to create a lovely base for our wreath. And then we're going to go back in once we've made that lovely base, and we're going to poke in all of these lovely ingredients to kind of add all that lovely texture element to it. Yeah, it's just one of the ways that when I was making it, I actually really liked the precision that I could get when using these. So I'm just going to start by cutting small pieces of the foliage. And obviously the smaller you cut your pieces, the smaller your wreath will be, and kind of like tighter and neater. I like mine to be sort of in the middle. If you've got a small door, you might want to think about making your bundles a little bit smaller. And I just like to use a little mixture of everything here. So that would be a really nice first little bundle, just something like that. So obviously I'm holding them at the stem point there. We've got the nice textured foliage coming out. And then we're just going to place that onto our wreath where you've tied it. And you're just going to make sure that the stems are kind of hidden and they're in contact with the straw wreath base, and that the foliage is doing a lovely job of kind of spanning out. And really you're aiming to cover the inside of the straw wreath base and the top, and then create your volume on the outside of the wreath, and that's going to give it that lovely shape and make it even more kind of bigger, and yeah. So I'm just going around that really nice and tight. I'm going to do 3 times. It doesn't need to be too neat, like that. I'm going to leave my wire there so that on my next bundle it's ready to attach. At no point do we take off the wire until we're completely happy with the base that we've made. And making a wreath is a bit of a process. You kind of have to bear with this stage of it, because it can look a bit strange, I guess. And if you're uncomfortable with making the bundles, the other way you can do it is by simply kind of laying the foliage on top so that you can really see how the next piece is going to be made. So if I just do that bit again, so kind of the beech would go one kind of smaller size here just to cover that side, a nice bigger one on that side, and then maybe some of this grevillea over there, another bit there, and a little bit of the pistache. Maybe underneath, like that. And that's, some people feel much more comfortable in doing that than making the bundles, just so you can get a really good idea. But like I said, there's no right or wrong in making a wreath. You can do it however you want. And then just really simply taking that wire around, and you just want to make sure that you're giving it a nice tug when you come back round. So just, you can really pull it if you wanted to. I'm just going to do 3 on that. And it's that process the entire way around your wreath in this direction, making sure that you're covering the stems as you go with each of your bundles so that there's no kind of gaps. You want to make sure that you're getting a nice kind of even shape. So yeah, we're just going to continue that process. And hopefully you just find it, you kind of lose yourself in this. Our dishwasher's on, so you might be able to hear it. Again, just nice and tight against that. And you really can get away with like not wasting anything when you make a wreath. That's one of the reasons I really love them as well. You can use everything, any kind of small thing that comes, you can really use it. All the small pieces can get kind of tucked in to them side bits to do a nice job of covering up. And it's still really nice just with these 3 ingredients. We haven't even got the other 3 in, so. I'd say I'm almost halfway. I'm just going to actually trim some of these. I don't know if you can see that I've left them quite long and they're poking out, so I just want to make sure that when I put the next bundle on, they're not kind of raising it up too much. And when I've done this next one, I'm going to hold it up so that you can see where we've got to, and make sure that I haven't kind of got any obvious gaps or anything that needs filling in. So if you're making this on your own and you're enjoying the peace and quiet, then there's kind of a couple of ways that you can hold your wreath up. You could stand in front of a mirror and hold it up just so you can get an idea. Or if you place it on the floor and you stand right above it, then you'll get a really good idea of the shape, or just a low table. But that's where I'm currently at with it. So we've got quite a nice even shape there so far. And yeah, this is all being covered in. It's just a case of kind of continuing to go. I'm just going to actually have a look. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that's coming so far. And I quite like the randomness sometimes of some of them being a bit longer than others. I think it makes it feel a bit wild, and I personally do really love that in a wreath. But if you're somebody that likes it to be a bit neater, a bit more refined, then you can take your time to really make each bundle kind of the same, and that will really help you achieve that look. But you can tell by going in that same direction the whole way, we're starting to form that lovely circle that a wreath typically is. So again, I'm just laying these pieces on top of that last one. Just going to get a little bit of the pistache. Sometimes the pistache can be particularly bushy, like this piece, if you can see that. It's just a bit too bulky, so you can just very simply cut some of the branches away that you can tuck into the sides, like I was saying, and then you've got a much more kind of manageable piece to work with that's more in keeping with what the other sized pieces that we've been making. It's a great foliage for its volume, but sometimes it's even too much. And actually, I don't know if you can see, when I put this piece down on top, I've got very much a repetition of this leaf, and it feels, by the time I probably get the rest of my ingredients in, it will look fine, but I feel like that might draw my eye to that particular place. So I'm just actually going to move that piece of pistache to the other side of the bundle. And then all of a sudden, you're getting pistache over here, pistache over there, and the grevillea and the beech are kind of mixing it up a little bit for your eye. It's just subtle little things like that that really help make it look much more kind of natural. I'm just trimming some of those off. And if you've got any of these little pieces that you want to tuck in, you can just go in under your existing wire and just poke them in like that. You can do it the whole way around if you wanted to. And just find any of your wire and try, and you probably need to cut that a bit better. I've got more of a point. A little bit of a wiggle. Like that. And it just all helps make it more voluminous and full, whilst also covering that straw wreath. as we start getting closer to back to the beginning of the wreath. That last bundle can sometimes be a bit tricky, but it's really important to make your wreath look complete, and like so that if somebody looked at it, they wouldn't know where you started or where you finished the wreath. So once we get round to that stage, I'll take it a little bit slower. And just start being mindful to not catch any of the other foliage. I've got a little bit of that autumn beech in there that I just wanted to make sure that I don't kind of trap it under my wire. And other thing that's important once you get back to the beginning is really trim them stems off so that they're not going to be seen at any point. Just make sure they're nice and neat there. So I think this is going to be my last bundle. And we've just got this small kind of gap here. If I pick it up and show you, where this last piece just needs to go in here. So we just need a nice shaped bundle to go in. Now on my last one, I personally find it easier to make a bundle rather than laying the foliage onto the wreath. Just because of the stem length, it can get a bit tricky. So you can obviously hold them up and kind of have a little kind of measure the size if that makes you feel more comfortable. And we've got the perfect amount of foliage. I've used almost absolutely everything. So you can kind of see just making this bundle is just going to tuck in there, and that is going to complete that shape. Now what we need to do is trim our stems as low as possible so that you can still tie them, but they're going to hide really nicely under that initial bundle that we started with. So we're going to gently pick up that first bundle and just sort of expose the straw wreath base. Position our stems, tucking them in. I like to hold them down with my thumb and then take the wire over it. And just being mindful, like I said earlier, to not catch any of the other foliage that isn't within that bundle as you're tying. And I'm going to go around 3 times, nice and tight. This is your last one, like so. And then once it's back, it might look a bit disjointed, but you're just going to kind of fluff everything out and just make sure that you've really covered any gap that was there, which I'm happy with because we're still going to add in all of our other ingredients yet. And I'm seeing from this angle, I can see I've left quite a lot of the straw wreath base exposed here. So I'm just going to go and use some of these small little leftover pieces of the pistache, or you might have a little bit of everything, and poke them underneath that wire. Because your wreath, often you will look at it from an angle more so than you will front on when you open and close the door. So you really do have to cover all your bases. So nice sharp point on the end of these so that you can tuck them in easy. just makes so much difference, because you always want to hide your mechanics if you can. You want people to just almost wonder, how did they make that? I know I certainly did when I was first starting. I used to go up to arrangements in like hotels, and I'd almost move the flowers and foliage out the way to try and peer in to see what they'd used to make it. Okay, that's looking much better. And now the only thing we need to do is tie this off before we start adding all of other lovely bits and bobs in. So you just want to take a small length, 4 or 5 inches, cut your wire, give it a nice tug one last time. I'm going to hold it down with my thumb just to make sure it doesn't move, and use it as a little kind of needle and thread, and just go under a couple of pieces of the wire, and it's just going to create a nice tight and secure join. I like to kind of position the wire in like a little loop, just makes it even easier to lift it up like so. And that is not going anywhere. And then just cut it off a bit smaller. Sometimes in these straw wreath bases you can then just poke it into the straw base, and it's not going anywhere. You've got no exposed wire that would damage, you know, walls or doors or anything like that. It's just nice and soft. So that's the current base to our wreath, which looks lovely as is. You could just stop there if you wanted to use your ingredients elsewhere in your home, but we're going to go one step further and add all these lovely other pieces that are really going to make it just so textural. I'm just going to clear some space to use these pieces. So first off, I'm going to add in the pampas grass. Now you get quite long like plumes on these, and if you kind of, if I do it on the worktop for you to see, in the middle of the plume there's like a main spine to it. Can you see that kind of more chunky main stem? And to make this into 2 stems, we're going to cut it about there. And all of a sudden, you've made that 1 stem into 2 that's a bit more in keeping with the size of our wreath. And then you can just simply use all of these to poke into your wreath anywhere that you see fit. And you want to just poke it until it feels like, you'll just know, it'll feel like it's kind of been caught under the wire, in between the foliage. You can just tell. So we're going to do that the whole way round, and I really want to make sure that I vary the lengths and positioning of the pampas. So some of it I want to have like a bit more inside the wreath, but probably not this bit because it's very big. If you wanted to go one step further, you could make this into 3 pieces just by snipping, so that has become 3. And then this piece I could just very simply poke in under there, and then I've kind of, once you've tucked it back in and got your foliage kind of over it, you've then got it distributed quite nice, almost like naturally very random, as everything else is, so it's very in keeping. And then you can carry on doing this the whole way round. And I think it's really important when you've done it to not just leave it. I think by tucking other foliage in and around it makes it look like it was always there. And this bit's quite a big one, so I'm actually going to let it be nice and big. and put it right at the back. Almost, so I'm just like lifting up this foliage just to find a secure piece of wire, which I can see there, and then pushing it in. Now, I can't push it much further than that, so I know that it can go there, but I'm just going to have to trim the stem down so that it's not poking out so much. So by just doing that and then positioning that foliage back over the top, I've just got a nice piece just poking through the leaves and the foliage. And this is quite a nice tall piece, so I might make this one into 3. So I'm just trying to find that lovely, stronger, almost the spine. Going to have a nice little wispy bit at the top, which will be there. And then a chunkier middle piece. And then a smaller piece there. And I'm just always looking for a piece of wire that I can just slot the pampas into. And because they're nice and they're quite strong stems and they're super thin, they're very easy to poke in. Making sure that I do some around the back. Giving it a nice tug. And then again with this piece, I'm just going to make a nice taller bit. There. And I've also got these little tiny pieces that have fallen, so they could go, really close to the wreath, like we did with the small pieces of pistache. Again, I'm making this one into 3 pieces. Use this smaller one first. I feel like that bit's a bit too close. So the beauty is you can just slide it out. I want it there, but I want it a bit more subtle, so I'm actually going to remove some of these side plumes, and they just very easily, you can just pull them down and they'll come away. And that just feels a lot more subtle and less solid. And just turning the wreath. And the other important thing with this is all of my stems that I'm inserting are going in exactly the same way as all of the foliage that we've already placed onto the wreath. Because so for example, this is how I've been doing it, making sure that the stem's going in the same direction. But if I suddenly started to try and poke it in that direction, you can see you're going to end up with a completely different shape, and you're also going to struggle to get these into the wire because it's not the right direction. Just going to cut that a bit further. Like so. My last piece of pampas is a slightly smaller one than the others, so I'm just going to make sure this one goes into 2. almost back to the beginning. So I'm just going to use these smaller pieces that I've got to fill in this little gap. Brilliant. So pampas is done. Next I'm going to go for our lovely panicum grass. And this variety is called Warrior, and it has almost a tinge of kind of burgundy plums to it on its leaves. And we're actually going to even use the leaves because they're lovely. They just add a whole different shape and structure to the wreath. And yeah, I'll show you how I do them, but I really loved using them. So just going to cut that elastic off, which I shouldn't be doing with these scissors, but as you can see, it doesn't work very well. So don't try that at home. And we've just got each stem is very tall. You've got this lovely, delicate grass that is just going to add a real nice wildness to the wreath. And then we're also going to use these lovely leaves. So you want to cut just above the leaf, and that becomes one stem that you can use, and this is the other one. Now this is already going to have this is already going to be like the length, so you don't need much of the other length to add to it, because you just want to be poking that in the same way that we've just been doing the pampas. And I personally prefer these to be shown off on the edges of the wreath, because you can really kind of see the delicacy that it adds. And then the leaves, I'm going to cut that a bit shorter, can just be inserted in the same way that we've been doing everything else, like so. And they just give like a bit of wildness, a bit of a different colour, different shape. I just really loved them. And then some of the leaves, you get this really dark plum tone to them. So it just adds a bit of depth at the same time. And some of the grasses are so big, like this one. It's got a slight casualty there, which I'll remove. It's so big that I can't really use that in the wreath, because if you had a look, it would almost kind of take over that whole piece. So I'm going to cut this down into two, maybe about there, so that I've then got a bit more of a workable piece here. And I'm going to remove these bottom two pieces, and then I can use that in here. Just going to find some wire, and these stems are so thin that they just poke in really easily. My advice would be to hold them as close to the point that you're inserting them at, just so that you don't risk them bending or snapping, because they can be a little bit fragile. And then again with the leaf, you don't have to use all the leaves. You've got 10 stems, so 10 leaves you might feel is a bit too much, but I'm going to use them as we go around, and I just, see how you feel about them. I really like them. And then these smaller pieces that we've then cut off, you can use as an individual stem because they're so long. So I'm going to cut those plumes off. I could use that. I could use these. Like, you've got so many to kind of work with then. I'm going to use this kind of more on the outer edge of the wreath, just for a slightly different look there. And the same with these ones, you could work them into the inner part of your wreath. Just always make sure to give it a nice fresh cut so that you've got the sharpest point possible. And you'll be surprised at what all these tiny little textures do to the overall look of your wreath. And if you don't fancy putting them in your wreath, save them and pop them in some bud vases because they're already sweet.
just searching for that wire to poke this into. Looks like there's quite a nice bit there.
And again, just kind of fluffing the other foliage in and around the stems just to make them nestle in really nicely. And then I'm almost back to the beginning with the grass, so I'm just going to use a couple of these little smaller side bits. And maybe just one more underneath that pampas, I think. Like so. Now I feel like I've got quite a lot of the long leaves on that side and not so many on this side, and I feel like there's maybe one too many over here. So I'm actually just going to remove that one and see how I feel about it, and maybe just tuck these in a little bit more. I think that's just a bit better. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then last but by absolute no means least is our lovely banksia. Now these, we've only got 5, and I really like to cluster 3 together and then 2 together somewhere in the wreath. It's totally up to you. You can disperse them randomly or cluster them like I'm going to. Their foliage on them is also really lovely, so don't waste that. I'm actually going to cut this quite short, this one, and then I've also got this to use somewhere in the wreath to poke in. But first of all, let's have a look at the banksia. Now I liked it deciding on the top and bottom of the wreath. So at this point, you can probably tell whereabouts you want it to be, top and bottom. So that might make quite a good top. Let me just have a little quick look over there. I feel like if I did that one, I've got this piece going straight up, so it's not quite what I want, the look I was going for. So I think maybe about there is my top, so then that's my bottom. So I'm going to place it on the work surface so that I know that that's where I'm standing, that's the bottom. And then I'm going to take one of the banksia and again, like we've been doing, just poke it underneath one of the wires that are already existing. like so. And you can kind of fluff them out so they become even like bigger, and I just like it because they just look really wild and crazy and autumnal. And then I'm going to take another one, and again fluff it all out. And I want it really close by, but not in exact, like not in a, like a line. So I just need to cut it down a little bit more. I want it kind of there. So I need to find a piece of wire that's going to allow me to do that. So I've just poked it under that one. Don't know if you can see there. And that's perfect. And then the last one, I want it to kind of almost be on the inner point of the wreath. I'm going to try and use a smaller one, this one. This is a smaller one, but it's got a very, very, very chunky stem. So we'll see if we can work with it. See what we can do. I might need to wire it. I'm going to make a really good angle on it, if I can, just to help. So might not go, which is fine. We can just very simply wire it, which I'll show you. So just take your wire reel, take a small length, about 5-6 inches. And if you've ever made a Christmas wreath, this is like how we do the cones. So you're going to wrap it so that it's like at the halfway point. You call these the little legs, and then you just twist the little legs around the stem, like so, nice and tight. You can kind of start turning it upside down and around so that you get a really good tie. And then you've got these two prongs that you can position and lay them down on. So I want it about there. Yeah. And then I'm just going to feed this wire around the back and try and find the other wire and marry them together, which is not easy and it is a bit fiddly. And I probably should have made my little legs a bit longer to make this a lot easier. But I've got them together, just need to twist them together. Which I'm not sure I can do. I might have to do another one. Longer piece. I'll trim this one off. And that's in exactly the same way. Just with some longer legs, please. Okay. I appreciate it's very tricky to see, but basically I'm just making sure that these meet kind of through the foliage. Might be able to see them there. And then twisting them back on each other as kind of tightly as possible, really, because you don't want the banksia to move. So nice and tight. Twisty, twisty. And then you can kind of fluff the foliage in and around it. And there it is. And then the other two, I might could do them together. One there, maybe. But I might do one this way and then one just poking in there. I really fancy it in there, so yeah. that. That one just fits quite nicely in there. I'm just going to fluff out that lovely crazy head that they have. And then you can always use the foliage if you want to. I'll just poke a few bits in before we finish. It's actually quite a similar shape to the grevillea that we used to start with, but it's much smaller and like daintier. I really like it. And all these different textures just really help the wreath kind of come alive. And then once you feel like you're happy, take a good step back, even leave the room because you've been looking at it for a while, and come back in and see how you feel about it, get somebody to hold it for you. And the only thing left to do is to use the twine to hang it with, which I'm hoping I have some here, which I do. So, again, not the best scissors to use for twine. Now that we know that that was my top, all we need to do is you could get somebody to hold it for you, but I just kind of hold it with one hand around about there. And then you want to take your twine and pass it through the foliage like that. And then you're just going to create a very small and tight knot right down to the straw wreath. Like that. And then I'm going to put a very easy knot in the top. Like that. And trim off those ends. And you have ready to hang beautiful autumn wreath. And in terms of kind of caring for it or anything, this is absolutely fine for being outside. Obviously, if it's absolutely chucking it down with rain, then you probably do want to maybe take it in, put it in some shelter for a moment. But honestly, it is going to be fine outside in the temperatures. You don't actually need to do anything to this. The foliage is going to dry out really nicely. The banksia dries really nicely too. So yeah, it should be beautiful right up until you use your Christmas wreath kit, which I can't even believe I'm talking about now. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this year's autumn wreath kit making. I hope you are very proud of your beautiful wreath. I would absolutely love to see them on your doors in your homes. It's one of my favourite parts of doing these with you. I love how they're all a little bit unique and all a bit different. So yeah, please do send me your photos. And yeah, I hope you've had just a really lovely, enjoyable time creating it with me, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Take care.